Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started to be respectful of the hour. There's a lot going on tonight, and one of the big things going on is me interviewing one of our distinguished alums, Nick Tran. And Nick is a 2011 graduate of the Paul Mirage School of Business full-time MBA, and he agreed to join me in the distinguished virtual speaker series here that we started when the pandemic started earlier this year. And this is about the fourth or fifth one of these. And in fact, Nick is one of those people who has started a new job during the pandemic, and we're excited to hear a little bit about that. He joined ByteDance as head of marketing for North America at TikTok earlier this year, and he's since then been promoted to head of global marketing for TikTok, where he oversees brand marketing, product marketing, media and partnerships, creative advertising, social media events, and research for the entire company. And he'll, I'm sure, share details about some of what that entails. Prior to TikTok, Nick was named VP and head of brand marketing at Hulu, where he launched several campaigns, including Better Ruins Everything, Hulu Has Live Sports, and the Tom Brady Super Bowl announcement. Nick helped the company win its first Cannes Lions award with World Record Egg and HHLS, and led to the doubling of their business in 2 years. So maybe that had a little something to do with TikTok being interested in Nick at that point in time. Prior to Hulu, Nick served in marketing leadership roles at Samsung, Stance, and Taco Bell. He's a graduate of UCSD, where he double majored in history and psychology prior to studying for his MBA at the Mirage School. A resident of Los Angeles, Nick has been named to both Fortune magazine and Ad Age magazine's 40 Under 40 lists. We're proud to count Nick among our alumni, obviously. He's now a member of the Dean's Leadership Circle with the Mirage School, which is the philanthropic arm of the Mirage School, supporting our students and our faculty and other initiatives. It's also the networking connection that helped lead to this interview tonight. So given all that's going on in his world and our world, we're grateful that he made time to join me tonight as a guest. So Nick, welcome.
Thank you.
So I just gave a little thumbnail sketch of your career, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path to becoming the head of global marketing at TikTok? I mean, and maybe what happened at the Mirage School that might have helped? What are your experiences that have helped? Studying habits, mentors, school teachers. You know, we have a lot of Mirage alum listening in. So
yeah, I definitely credit Mirage to being a pivotal part of my career trajectory. I actually didn't have any marketing experience before joining Mirage, and the whole purpose of going back to get my MBA was actually to do the whole career change. So my goal was actually to really hone in my skills and learn as much as I could in marketing while I was at Mirage. Random fun fact that I tell a lot of students and folks was because I didn't have that marketing background, I really tried to soak up and learn as much as I could during my time at Mirage. And in my second year, I was actually taking 5 classes and then auditing 2, one quarter in particular, because there were just a lot of classes that I wanted to learn about. And one of my life hacks at the time was in the classes that I was auditing, where it wasn't a requirement for me to participate, I actually didn't read the assigned reading, but would go on Amazon and look up to see what the recommended reading to go with that book was. And I knew undoubtedly that the professor or the lecturer would go through and give an overview of that book and have the class participate, and you basically get a sense of what that book was about. So in those classes that I was auditing, I was trying to double up on everything that I could learn at the time. So that was really, you know, my initial like humble beginnings in the world of marketing was just through the Mirage School, and then got my first job as an intern at Taco Bell. And a fun random thread that kind of like brings my whole career trajectory together is the fact that every place I join ends up having a crisis within my first 2 months. So I don't know if that's something that many people can say, but I started at Taco Bell where I joined, and they were in the middle of a beef lawsuit where somebody claimed that they didn't use real beef, which wasn't true at all. But that perception was my first taste at how impactful a brand is to a company. And if your brand is perceived negatively, it could have serious impact to the business overall. So I was able to work in an environment where I was groomed by some of the best marketers that I've come across even to date. And the advice that I was given when I first joined Taco Bell was from our head of marketing at the time, who said, your job as an intern is to basically make us cool and don't get us sued. And that advice is sort of what helped me throughout my career, which was just the idea of how do I make whatever brand I'm working on cool without getting them sued. So just the
We
only
just cut to that's it right there. Cut to that.
yeah. So it's been a fun journey. At Taco Bell, we obviously made a lot of noise in the social media space, and that's really where I got my background in marketing, and was fortunate enough to ride the tide and really get to a place in my career where social, as it became a bigger pillar in marketing, just being seen as an expert in that space helped propel me to different roles. I then joined Stance, which is a sock company based in San Clemente. At the time, it was small, but we really grew that to be a nationally recognized brand that was doing deals with the NBA, Disney, Star Wars, Rihanna, so on and so forth. Actually, while I was at Stance, I had the strangest phone call that also changed my career trajectory. It was a call from CMO of Samsung. So he somehow got my cell phone, called, and I didn't recognize the number. Normally I don't pick up, but for some reason that day, I remember I was just sitting in my living room watching TV, and I see this call from a number I didn't recognize. I pick it up, and on the other end, it was a gentleman who basically said, "Hi, my name is Mark. I'm the CMO of Samsung. I asked 6 people if I had to hire one marketer, who would it be? I asked 3 people in New York and 3 people in LA, and 5 out of the 6 said you. So who are you and what do you do?" So I thought that was like the strangest introduction, but it was, obviously fun and exciting. So I gave him a little bit of insight in who I was, my philosophy on marketing, and I remember we left the call with him just saying, "You'll hear from us soon." And then sure enough, the next day I get a call from HR that said, "What do you want to do? Where do you want to live? What do you want to make?" So I obviously then switched and started my time at Samsung. And as I mentioned before, there's always a crisis wherever I go. So I joined Samsung, and a month later, phones started catching on fire. So we had the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 recall, and we had to work our way out of becoming a brand that people associated with a specific product into a brand that people just actually had some emotional tie to. So went to Samsung for a couple of years, was asked to join Hulu, where they felt like they didn't have a real brand presence, and was able to work with Kelly Campbell and help to put some real fun and energy into the Hulu brand. And that's where we came up with campaigns you mentioned before. The most notable is probably either Better Ruins Everything or Hulu Has Live Sports. And the campaign that you mentioned, the Super Bowl, was where we used Tom Brady to tease out an announcement that looked like he was going to retire. And during the TV commercial, he essentially reveals that he's not going anywhere, and that he was just trying to share the message that Hulu doesn't just have live sports. We have all these other things too. So it was something that generated a lot of earned media and created some buzz. And it was around that time that I realized that I wanted to explore other options, and ended up going to TikTok, where it's been a wild and crazy ride. And as most people know, we also hit a crisis with the administration trying to ban us. But luckily, everything is still going well, and we're in a great place right now.
So, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I guess I don't know what the answer is. Is the answer that when Nick takes a job, buy stock, or wait a little while and buy stock, right? Because you don't want right.
Yeah, I'd say short it right when I join.
Yeah.
And buy it after the dip.
Okay, there you go. Sounds good. So, you're right in the middle of social media right now, and right at the tip of the spear, really, in more ways than one. And I thought you shared some really interesting perspectives with me as to why I would be interested in the other day when we talked about it. And lo and behold, I went on and did what you recommended. And now I'm stuck in this rabbit hole that I love TikTok because it's got stuff there for me. It has that stuff there for everybody, right? And it's amazing what can happen in 15 seconds. But how has COVID-19 impacted social media marketing strategies? Has it made them more critical, less critical? What has it done to the way you think about your business?
Yeah, there's probably several parts to that question. I'd say from a platform perspective, you obviously see increased growth during a time when most people are either working from home or able to um, interact or engage on the app. From a broad social perspective, I'd say that it whether you're in pandemic or not, you basically as a marketer want to reach people where they're engaging. And it wasn't lost on marketers even before the pandemic that a lot of people were diverting their attention to social media apps. I think the nuance with TikTok is that we don't actually see ourselves as a social media app. One of the elements of a social media app is the idea of a social graph where you are able to map out your network and you engage with the specific community, um, like you do on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, where you're actually following people you know and trying to make these types of connections. The fun thing about TikTok is that it feels and behaves like a mix of social, but really more heavily weighted on the entertainment side. So what we see is that people use TikTok not to connect with friends or people they know, but to be entertained and watch videos from most people that they actually don't know. And in the same way that you might flip on Netflix or Hulu or even just television for that matter, and how you browse through and channel surf, you're essentially doing that same behavior with TikTok where you're actually flipping through different creators and handles and finding quote unquote channels that you enjoy, and then you're basically sucked into the rabbit hole that you mentioned where you're just getting fed a curated list of things that are just perfect for you. So that's kind of what the magic is with TikTok, and why I find it fascinating, because it's changing the behavior that people use, and it's creating opportunities that didn't exist before. So
Right.
yeah, but again, to your point with the pandemic, yes, we've seen growth. We saw growth at Hulu when I was still there, and we're seeing growth across TikTok and other platforms. But at the same time, I think all it's doing is pulling forward some of the demand that otherwise existed, but just getting people more engaged at an earlier point than they probably would have in the natural life cycle.
So actually, I hadn't thought of that. That's really interesting answer. That you don't really view yourselves as social media. You use the platforms that social media use, but that's true. I don't know any of those people whose videos I'm watching. But what is the job of the head of global marketing? What do you have to do? What are you trying to increase, and who are you increasing it with, and what's your team organized like around the world?
Yeah, it's not too different from place to place. One of the things that I probably should have mentioned is my dream job is actually to go back to a grad program and teach marketing. So that's like my dream job, let's say 10 years out. And when I think about where I go, it's really about can I learn more there than I otherwise have knowledge on, and is it going to be a fun experience? Because that's kind of what motivates me. As my thesis, I always think about how do I impact culture at scale. And at every company I've been at, it's with the idea of how do I impact as many people as possible through the lens of culture in a way that's positive for the business overall. And when I look at what my job is, I realize that it doesn't matter the industry I'm in. It's always pretty much the same. So if you are a marketer for food and beverage or CPG or consumer electronics or in this case a platform, the fundamental aspects and the foundational elements that you learn even in the MBA program are things that you carry with you no matter where you end up. And my job is essentially to build the brand, and that's determined by things like metrics that most people probably look at, like awareness and intent to download and brand love scores that various firms might produce. And as you get deeper into the funnel, you're looking at engagement and frequency of use within the app particularly. And then on the flip side, you're also looking at what your retention rates are. So that doesn't change if you think about it at a macro level, because whether you're talking about fast food or you're talking about, TikTok, like it's the same fundamentals that you're going to want to measure. Like, what's our brand awareness? What's our, frequency, and, how are people engaging, and do people like the brand and the company? So that's pretty much been consistent. My current role as head of global marketing is divided up into 8 major regions. So I have like a head of marketing in each major region. So we have North America, Latin America, Europe, Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, as sort of like the major markets that I have. And then I have teams that are in each of those regions. And then I also have a group that's part of our central marketing team, which essentially they don't work on a specific region. They work more horizontally across the business. So it'll be like global brand and global product marketing and media and partnerships and strategy and operations. So each of those functions sort of work with all of the regions to try to create some consistency across the globe with the brand and the product marketing and all those other elements. Oh, you're muted.
We talked about a few questions that we might touch on here. Actually, when you bring that up, when you're talking about the brand, it seems very popular. And so how do you with Gen Z, really popular with Gen Z, but what about the other generations? How do you get more people like me? Not everybody gets to talk to the head of global marketing to tell them this might be of interest and here's why. Do you foresee an increase in these other market segments, maybe even baby boomers?
Yeah, of course. In the same way that older generations might be a little bit slower on that adoption curve of newer technology or platforms, you do eventually see, people join, especially if you start to understand that this isn't another social app that you have to engage with and that you have to update your status or send messages to so-and-so and any of those things. If you think of it in the same way that you just think about entertainment, then as long as people recognize that there's content there that's for them, they're going to check it out. And when they do, they'll see that it's highly engaging and very fun overall. So the recent ad that we just debuted in the US and also rolling out globally is helping us tell that message. So the campaign is called It Starts on TikTok. And it came from this insight that I had with the team where there was a period of time in my life where I'd turn on the radio. I wouldn't know a single song. Like literally it'd be some new song that I wasn't aware of, didn't know who the artist was or anything along those lines. But since listening and watching TikTok videos, constantly, what I realized is that all the songs that end up trending on Billboard and hitting, #1 on the singles charts, most of those actually started on TikTok. And the hypothesis was if music that breaks into the mainstream culture got their start on TikTok, whether it's a famous artist or a new artist that no one had even heard of before, what other elements that are trending in culture started within the platform? And sure enough, we found hundreds of examples of different things that started on TikTok and became like a cultural trend. Everything from food recipes to fitness tips and hacks to personal finance tips that ended up doing well on Robinhood and other apps. And ultimately, what we found is that a lot of the things that are relevant in culture actually started on the platform. So if you have a platform that's generating relevance in culture, you're able to showcase that the content is very broad and can hit different types of audiences. It's just a matter of time before you start to get people to start to adapt and eventually adopt that platform as their way to be engaged and be entertained.
So I'm actually looking. I'm going to kind of mix in some of the questions of people that are listening in. I think it's probably, we can kind of jump around here a little bit because what you're saying is prompting questions here. Um, because marketing is considered a science and an art, how much of your work is art based and how much of your work is science based?
Yeah, that's a really fun question. I'd say long gone are the days where my job even remotely emulates Don Draper from Mad Men in a uh, big office sipping whiskey and just throwing out ideas. I think that's not really like the case anymore. I think the question really talks about the balance between data and the science side of marketing and the art and the creative side. So when I think about how teams are structured and how successful marketing organizations um, basically work, you definitely have a bigger slant now more than ever into the science side of things. Um, One of my favorite, I don't know if he's like an adjunct professor, but it's actually someone who worked at Taco Bell, who I thought was probably one of the smartest people, was also a Mirage alum who actually ended up teaching a class at the Mirage School. I actually audited that class. His name's um, uh, Tom. I'm blanking on his last name right now. I don't know why, but
Wagner.
yes, Tom Wagner. Yes, 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 yes. So Tom Wagner, uh, by far one of the most brilliant like marketers that I've ever come across, and he was able to break down a little bit of the science and the data side for me earlier on in my career, and he also proposed his model on how to look at different types of insights and how insights married with your brand promise can really yield creative ideas that resonate with your target audience. So I'd say that like my strengths as a marketer are grounded not just in the ridiculously over the top ideas that I might come up with or that my team might come up with, but it's also the fact that they're grounded in real insights that I force the team to develop, and then those insights are also objectively brought to life with data to back them up. So I do think I don't want to say it's 50-50. I always tend to lean a little bit more on the creative side just because I think that that's where the real magic happens. But I would readily admit that the data, the science, the insight side of marketing isn't just like a fad. It's probably what's going to separate good marketers from great marketers.
Right, right. Okay, I like that. I've got another question here, and this came in. It was prompted maybe by me talking about being interested. This is from Keith Boothroyd, and Keith, he's our Dean's Leadership Circle Vice Chair, and I'm sitting right here, Keith, but I won't take too much offense. It says it seems like a lot of the older generation, like the Dean, are now joining TikTok. Do you think this will start to drive away the younger generation, like what happened with Facebook? And I know it also happened with some of Facebook's predecessors. So what are you doing to prevent this from happening? Because it's not cool if your grandpa's doing it, right? So
I actually disagree. So I understand the belief, but as I mentioned before, this isn't like Facebook, because the reason why younger generations fled Facebook when their parents or their grandparents jumped on is because they were basically posting up personal things about their life that they actually didn't want their parents to know about. So if I checked into a bar, hypothetically, or a friend's house or whatever it is you would go do, it's not something that you want to broadcast to your parents or your grandparents. Or if you post a picture with you and your friends and there's like something happening in the back, like it's things that you do because you assume it's like a place where you can just hang out with friends. And then once your parents and your grandparents jump in, it makes you change your thoughts on it. The thing about TikTok is we aren't really a place where you want to go to basically understand what your friends are doing. It's, again, as I mentioned before, it's a place where you just go to get entertained. And what we found, especially in COVID, that was fascinating was, unlike other platforms, we found that TikTok was actually bringing a lot of families together more so than pushing them apart. So one of the, memes that you'll see these days are just how families are sitting at the dinner table and they're all on their phones, all individually watching like, Instagram or other platforms, and not talking or hanging out with each other. So you see people that are like physically together, but wrapped up into their device and not interacting. What we saw with TikTok was actually people were watching videos together, which is why we created a beta for OTT on Amazon Fire TV to allow for more co-viewing. But also, we found that people were actually trying to co-create content with their parents or grandparents. So some of the most popular TikTok videos are grandkids doing an interview, that's like a very quick style interview with their grandparents, or teaching them a new dance, or asking them a fun question. And we actually found that unlike other social platforms, this behaved more like an entertainment platform where you don't mind watching TV or TikTok videos with your parents or your grandparents watching the same thing. Everyone gets the same, response, where it's either humorous and funny, or you learn something that you didn't know before, and it starts a conversation about, wow, that was so cool, we should try to do something like that. And then you actually create an interaction to create those TikTok videos. So I definitely see this as being a different animal. And to the question, what am I doing? The good thing is I don't have to do anything yet. People are natively happy to have their parents and grandparents jump on the platform, and they're actually encouraging that. And you see a lot more interaction between families than you've seen in any other platform. So we're not taking any real approach on needing to do anything, because the community is naturally gravitating towards that interaction and making it so more people can join and feel like they're part of a bigger community.
Well, as a new grandparent, that makes me feel good. I like that answer. Good job. So you actually, a lot of what you said here has prompted people to ask, and we're getting these questions coming through. What does your day look like? What does the global marketing head for TikTok's daily tasks entail?
Yeah, that's fun. I'd say lots of Zoom meetings, especially during these times. So I'm on Zoom pretty much throughout the whole day. But I do start my day talking to the European and Middle East teams, just because of the time difference. So my mornings normally consist with meetings with those teams. I spend the middle of my day with the Americas. So I normally meet with either the US, Canada, or Latin America team. And then in the evenings, I normally spend time with the team in Asia. So you can basically just look at my day as being broken up into 3 parts.
Time zones. Yeah.
Time zones. I just basically spend time with each of my reports and each of the teams. And, we basically discuss everything from opportunities from a campaign perspective to any trends that we see that might make sense, to even, working on future strategy for 2021 or whatever else it might be. I try to have a global marketing heads meeting each week, and we just basically picked the most convenient time for everyone. So it's early in the morning in the US, and then that's late at night in Asia, and then middle of the day for Europe. So most of my day is basically just Zoom meetings and coming up with concepts for us to push forward.
That segues to another question, listener question. How much does your marketing strategy differ region to region?
Again, great question. I purposely tried to create a global framework that had a mix of like global strategy and global brand consistency, but allowed for localization, because I don't think, like TikTok, there's like a one size fits all marketing strategy, because our content is so different. So what I learned quickly is that your For You page, which is the main way that people are consuming content on the app, it'll be different from person to person, let alone region to region. So it's such a personalized algorithm that basically gives you the content that you specifically want, that it would be foolish for me to create a singular brand campaign, let's say, that didn't have any localization across the different regions and countries. So I would say I've taken special interest in creating a community marketing team that is more local in nature, and they identify ways for the brand to come to life, not only at a local regional level, but also at a local community level. So everything from how sports differ from region to region, or the idea of gaming differs from region to region, or fashion, or food, or fitness, or you name it. I have different teams in different regions working on those local nuances so that when they bring a sports campaign to life in the Middle East, like for example, they're very aware of the cultural norms and customs there, and they adapt that creative to fit that, which is much different than what you might see in the US or in Australia or in Indonesia, as an example. So yeah, I definitely have this belief that for a company as dynamic as TikTok with the content that we have to be balance between a global sort of center of excellence in some instances and regional autonomy for the local regions to do what they do best.
Great. So this has come up a couple of times. This question is how TikTok was affected by Instagram's release of Reels, and how would you recommend a company facing a similar experience might make the best of that kind of situation?
I won't comment on competitors directly, but I will say that I don't see any real impact, like just overall. I'll just kind of leave it at that. But if you just read the news about the products, there's more that they probably could and should do. But regardless, like I think Instagram as a platform, it has a chance to be very complementary because it's basically photo based, and if you use it for the intent that it was created, it's a great platform that I think complements a lot of like what we're doing because we're short form video. I think in general, so not talking about Instagram, but just like in general, if you find a lot of success with your company and you do something better than anyone else, and somebody else does something totally different and they're successful, if you then switch gears and try to compete at that level, it's going to be a gamble because you're basically diverting your resources and your attention from being great at this one thing to then trying to like play, two different sides of the same thing in a way where you hope to win in both. And I think that's just like a difficult proposition. So again, not talking about Instagram, but just in general as a business principle.
Yeah.
I think if you do what you do better than anyone else, there's no reason to pivot from that unless you're hurting from a business standpoint and you need to make that evolution. So I would definitely say that, we know what we do best, and we're committed to delivering an engaging and, fun and interactive platform for a community of users that, love the platform and are able to be their authentic self. I think that's the other beauty about TikTok that I don't see in other platforms. People tend to compartmentalize their life. And as an example, I'll use myself as an example. Like I use LinkedIn for my professional life, and I post articles or thoughts or things that are very like professionally focused. And then I have Facebook, which is more for my family. And like I find out whose birthday is coming up so I can make sure I wish them happy birthday. I'll put up my like photos and store them on Facebook, and I'll get like updates on what's happening with my family and my close friends. And then Instagram is sort of like my aspirational self. Like this is like what you project out in the world to show like, here's what I'm doing that's so cool and awesome. And you're looking at fashion and food and travel accounts, and you're kind of putting your wish list of like, what you want to do. So you basically compartmentalize your life through all these social platforms. And what I love about TikTok is that it's the one place where I feel like people are comfortable being their full self. So I've seen videos from creators that range from I'm doing this fun thing in this moment to I'm in my pajamas at home, no makeup on, just hanging out and wanted to like chat on TikTok for a second. So I do think that part of the magic of TikTok that I don't see in other platforms is the fact that people are able to be their authentic self at all times, and the community embraces that. Whereas, on other platforms, you have to be a perfect version of yourself or a part of who you are. So that's like another thing that I find to be a really fun differentiator.
Okay, thanks. So let's back up a little bit. And you said that you mentioned that you had 5 people out of 6 recommended you to the CMO of Samsung, and then you also shared your marketing philosophy with Samsung's CMO. And I think you've kind of expanded a little bit upon that. But are you an active networker? How did those 5 people know you, and how did they? And then is it your marketing philosophy that's unique, or is it because you share it more effectively? I mean, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I found out eventually who a couple of those people were, so I can guess others. But yeah, I think my assumption is that I probably either met them when I was speaking at a conference, or it was likely somebody that was in my network. So to the question of like, are networks worth cultivating in marketing? Like absolutely, and not too different than in life. And it's also one of the benefits of going to an MBA program. Like that's literally where you start developing your network and your first cohort. Like there are people from Mirage that I still talk to like to this day, and it's not only folks that were in my specific class, but it's also some of the professors, and it's also some of the like alum. So I definitely think that having a strong network is critical to success. I probably wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had if I didn't have this network. One of the nuanced things that popped up early in my career, and I attribute this to somebody that actually works locally in Newport Beach at Chipotle. Um, Her name's Tressie Lieberman, but she was my first like real manager and coach and mentor. She essentially um, didn't have like a big ego about the work, and she put me in the spotlight at a much earlier time than I probably should have been. Like to be completely honest, like I was an intern at Taco Bell, became like an associate brand manager, and we came up with a few stunts that generated a lot of like buzz in the marketing industry. And I think most managers would have taken those opportunities to like spotlight themselves or take the interview with the reporter and share what they did, which would have been totally fine because as the manager you're the one that's directing a lot of those endeavors. But she was always really gracious and said, no, you came up with this idea, so you should talk about it. So one of the things that helped propel me earlier on was having a leader that let me get the credit for some of the early ideas that I had. And being written up, especially in the marketing world, it generates a lot of credibility, because then people who read the trade publications or talk to other people say like, oh, that stunt that Taco Bell did, oh, that was done by this one person because I read about it in such and such place. And that was probably like the first real entrance or wave that I got entered that world of networking, because it wasn't something that I focused on. Once I realized how important it was, because people would mention like, oh, I saw you speak at XYZ, or I read about this thing, then I knew that it was like a very important tool for marketers in the long run. Another super random way that I got into networking, I guess, I was a diehard fan of the Hundreds. It's like a small clothing apparel streetwear brand based in LA. And earlier on in my career, I was just like obsessed with this brand. So I would wear it everywhere I went. So I'd wear hoodies, I'd wear sweatshirts, I'd wear hats, I'd wear all these different things from the Hundreds. And it's one of those moments that are just like completely, lucky and just like lightning striking. But I was at South by Southwest. Again, I was a year in at Taco Bell. I'm not sure if I was still an intern or if I was an associate manager, but it was somewhere earlier in my career. And Mashable had asked me to do a video interview to talk about some of the social media stunts that we've been doing at Taco Bell. And I remember I did the interview and I was like wearing my normal clothes. And the next day, so I was wearing the same hat. The next day, someone walked by me and they said, Nick Tran, Taco Bell. And I remember I looked at that person, I was like, sorry, do I know you? Like, how did you know who I was? And he said, uh, I'm Bobby Hundreds. You're wearing my hat. And I looked at him and I was just like, oh my goodness, like this is the founder and head of creative and designer for this brand that I've been obsessed with. And he basically saw that I was a huge fan of the brand, and he called that out and said like, yeah, I knew you were because someone tweeted me and told me that, hey, the dude from Taco Bell is wearing your stuff like on this interview. And he said like, who would have thought that of all the people that I would run into today, it was you, because there's like hundreds of thousands of people here, and I see you wearing my hat, and I thought to myself like, I should talk to this person. So immediately he said, like, we should exchange numbers and be friends. And since then, we've always just stayed close and been friends. And meeting him expanded my network from a cultural perspective. So I got to meet a lot of people in the streetwear space. It's also how I got to, build up that relationship with folks at Stance, and that spread even further so that I met people from Kith, like Ronnie Fike, who's become like a close friend, and so on and so forth. So I've just seen my network organically grow just by sort of being at the right place at the right time and just representing myself for who I was and being passionate about the things that I love. So I've always loved streetwear. So that's an area that developed. And then as I started to get more recognition in marketing, I started to know more marketing leaders who I would then continue to maintain a relationship with. So even to this day, like guys like Gary Vaynerchuk and all those folks have become like close friends that I can rely on for advice and anything else that I might need. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I've only done how many of these Zoom meetings, and you still forget once in a while, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned South by Southwest, and you're there, and there are a lot of people. But do you mentioned the idea that this is a question? I want to read it directly because I think it bears reading straight out. It starts on TikTok. You said that. Do you see TikTok at some point having events such as the TikTok Music Festival, where you gather TikTok artists with the most number of followers together on a music festival event and help launch their careers?
Yeah, I mean, I am a huge fan of taking more traditional marketing channels and bringing new life into them. So one of the things that I love that most people are always surprised by. So obviously I mentioned I got my start in social media and everyone expected me to go all in on digital marketing and social. But as the landscape has evolved and more people and more brands have just jumped into social media and it's become a little bit more saturated, it's really tough to break through and create any real differentiation. Every brand has their presence in social and every brand is trying to behave in a similar fashion to generate that buzz. So areas that I love are sort of the experiential worlds and things that are more physical in nature. I think those are areas that we could, continue to do more with, especially after COVID. I love print, I love radio, I love out of home. And again, those are things that most people from the digital social space would be a little bit surprised by. But I definitely think that if you innovate in these channels and you do something that is unexpected, that's where the real magic happens. And it's not lost on me that you also get to find better rates. So just from a media perspective, like if everyone's going one direction and then you pivot and you go another direction, people are spending more, CPM averages on one hand, and then you're able to like find deficiencies in other areas. And Gary Vee always talks about the idea of like attention arbitrage and all that stuff. And there's like some truth to that. Like I always talk about how in my realm, attention should be the outcome and not the goal. So if you do things that bring value to the community in any of those media channels or experiential activations, you'll win and you'll get the attention as an outcome, and you don't have to focus on that as the main objective. But when it comes to experiential like concerts or festival activations or things like that, like I think once we see the pandemic get to a point where we can actually go out and about and get semi back to normal, I'm sure there's going to be a huge push because people are going to be craving that kind of interaction and that kind of activity. So yeah, 100%.
Actually, that actually leads to another viewer question. They're asking, what trends do you see getting more popular going ahead in marketing as more and more people are working from home? So during the pandemic and then maybe post-pandemic with more work from home, do you see trends that are relevant to you?
So there's the question, do I see work from home as being a trend that's relevant, or what was the?
Well, marketing trends in marketing that are more relevant as more people work from home.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course. So the interesting thing will be how quickly companies can make that pivot, during this time, because one of the things that I think people probably experienced is a lot of brands started to adopt what they call like, more COVID related advertising. And within, let's say, a month, that became kind of old. And anytime a new company came out with like their version of a pandemic related ad, it just became like overwhelming for people. And it's something that people didn't want to see anymore. As you look at trends, I think there's like a natural inclination to want to jump on the trend and capitalize on it, so to speak. But I think the best marketers are able to anticipate where that trend is going and then find complementary avenues or ways to bring that insight to life, but in a way that no one was expecting. So like while people are going down one path, you kind of like pivot and do something a little bit differently. Some of the key trends that we're obviously looking at with people that are working from home are just how often people are on their screens and how people want to, disconnect it, more than they probably used to because they can't get out as often. Other things are how do you help people escape in a way? So those are things that are very specific to this time, but you could see how in the future, there's going to be some behaviors that we've adopted that we may not necessarily change altogether post-pandemic. So I think it's just about figuring out which ones are trends in the short term and which ones are going to be embedded in a new behavior that people then adopt and adapt to in the long run, and then ensuring that your company is able to, prioritize which those activations are good for your brand overall, and really focus on those.
So that actually kind of raises another viewer question, and then I'd like to combine it with one of the questions that we'd had here that we prepared. It's about the culture of TikTok, and so how closely do you and your team work with the product team?
Oh, actually, really closely. So the product team at TikTok is broken up into a few different, I guess, like categories or types of product. And if you think about TikTok Live as an example, it's a new product that the team came up with that we work closely with, because on our end, my job is to then showcase and highlight those features of the new product and ultimately get more of our community to engage with those things. So it works two ways. One, product team might come up with a product on their own, we market it, easy. On the other hand, we might identify a gap that's happening within our community base, and we might surface that to the product team and say like, hey, you created, live, it's great, but we noticed that a lot of people are watching live streams and commenting on the, sweatshirt that the person's wearing. How can we create maybe an e-com, functionality within TikTok Live? And so we'll have this back and forth conversation and collaboration with the product team to basically, yeah, that seems like a viable use case. Let's create, a product roadmap document that allows us to assess the viability of that product in the timeline. And then we'll work on the opposite end of trying to figure out like what the market size opportunity is and how do we best market that. And we'll come together with like a plan to bring that to life pretty closely together. So I'd say the product team is probably one of my closest partners when it comes to a software app.
I think another viewer question is a question that a lot of us in leadership have. Can you elaborate more on how you force insights from your team?
Yeah.
Right? You've got your creative thinkers and sometimes they just don't bring their creative thought. How do you force that?
Yeah.
How do
So force is, I know I used that word earlier, and I'm obviously not shocked that someone caught that. I was trained again by like Tom and other folks at Taco Bell that they didn't let you get by with just like a really fun creative idea. You had to basically justify and explain not only like why it was cool, but why it would matter to your audience. So like, why should they care about it? And the only way that we could really bring that to life was by bringing the insight and teasing it out. So Tom has this in his class, he actually talked about like 4 insights that really matter. And one was the brand insight, one was a product insight, one's an occasional insight. And then the 4th one was, let's see, brand, product, occasional. Again, I'm blanking on the 4th one, but anyway, he had 4 insights that we would always have to like bring to life and ground the creative idea around. The other thing that I learned from my days at Yum, I believe came from David Novak, who was at one point the CEO, chairman of Yum, and he basically made you create like a grid. And this grid essentially mapped out like the habit, belief, or perception that you wanted to change, reinforce, or build. So what I would always tell my teams at a very basic level is you have 9 objectives in marketing that every campaign is trying to do. Just draw this grid and tell me like which thing are you trying to do? Are you trying to like build a belief, build a habit, build a perception, or change, reinforce, like whatever the grid would show. And once you ground people into the idea of like, okay, I know my objective, then the insights that they use help to inform that strategy and that approach. So then they would then look at the various insights and say like, okay, oh, the fourth one that Tom mentioned was a human insight. So the idea would be like, okay, is this something that will resonate with this audience because it's grounded in objective data that showcases like why this would be the case. So as an example, let's say you have like the Snuggie, right? The Snuggie is that like basically just a robe, but like flipped around essentially. And I remember in the class, he talked about how that's from a product insight where somebody was probably like laying on the couch, blanket on, and trying to reach for a remote control or their drink, and they couldn't because they would get out of the blanket and it would just be like inconvenience. So they created a product that generated millions of dollars worth of sales off of a product insight that if you just create basically a robe or a blanket with armholes, you could essentially create a multi-million-dollar branded product. So another insight that he talked about was a brand insight where Coca-Cola changed their formula at one point and created new Coke, and they did that because they were losing taste test to Pepsi. But when they launched new Coke, it was essentially a failed experiment, and they had to go back to classic Coke, which is why it says Coca-Cola Classic now. His rationale, which made sense and resonated with me, was the fact that people didn't drink Coke because of the taste. They drank it because of the representation that it had on their lives in terms of nostalgia and this idea of a very fun, simple time in like 50s Americana and all that fun stuff. So it was really the brand that people were buying into and not the actual product itself. So if you can think about the insight that you're trying to bring to life, then you can form a strategy and ultimately like a creative concept or a campaign that really makes that resonate with your audience.
Great. Well, I've got a couple of, I'm getting a lot of viewer questions in here, but we want to try and wrap this up in a reasonable amount of time. I wanted to ask you a kind of a combined viewer question with a question that I think we agreed we'd talk about, and that is, you've been involved with the Mirage School after graduation. I wanted you to talk a little bit about the Dean's Leadership Circle and why you think it's important to be a part of that organization. But a viewer specifically then asked, can you share some tips on how to expand your network professionally and how to keep in touch with most or all of your connections? Because, we start building this network and it's, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously tools like LinkedIn make that much easier. Like I still remember back in the day, people had business cards, right? And I haven't had business cards in my last, 3 or 4 jobs or whatever it might be. And I think these tools that are, made to help create connections and help, professional business folks are there if you leverage them in the right way to maintain connections with people that you otherwise wouldn't, be able to reach out to so easily. So that's probably like the most optimal way that I would manage that. But also, I make sure that my goal is to bring as much value as I can to my network and my community. So I speak on various, conference panels. I'll do things with the school. Like I always try to go back and teach a class at Mirage, mainly with Lorraine Lau-Gesk. Like I always like do a guest lecture for her marketing classes or do a case study for the midterms or the finals for the class. And like I just have always felt that the more I give and the more I push out into the world, I've seen it come back, tenfold without even trying to make that the actual objective. So like my I guess like philosophy is if I can help or if I can share a contact with someone or if I can connect someone to someone else that I know, like I'm always happy to do it. And then with tools like LinkedIn, it's very easy to reach out to someone and just say like, hey, saw you speak at this thing, really fascinated by XYZ, would love to connect. And I think if you go into it with the intent to just network and bring value and not to like network to get something out of it, it goes a long way. Like I get a lot of requests where people say like, hey, I've never met you, but I saw this job on the TikTok portal and I'd love for you to like get me this job. Like that's obviously the wrong approach. But then I've had other people that reach out and say like, hey, I'm fascinated by this article where you shared insights on XYZ. It's something that I'm also passionate about. Would love to have a conversation just to understand more about that topic. So in those situations, you're like, yeah, of course, like here, I'll connect with you. And then before you know it, you're automatically recommending them for a job within your company because you see that they brought value to the table. They also shared a passion about something similar, and you form an actual relationship. So I think those are probably the best approaches to doing networking, and using tools like LinkedIn and also things like the DLC. Like I obviously have an opportunity now to meet more people in a professional environment than I otherwise would have. And having these networks and organizations that help to curate a group of people together are always, beneficial in the long run.
Well, that is great, Nick. I just want to thank you for taking time out of your Zoom fatigue and adding a little more Zoom fatigue here. This is really important, and I think there are a lot more questions that we could have asked. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to our viewers, but maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road, and we'll see what happens here after some of the dust settles with what's going on, and we can talk about some of the crises and how you actually literally manage through the crisis sometimes. But I'm just really personally appreciative of you spending the hour with us, and we had to spend a little time prepping, making time, and it's an important night. I assume everybody's recording the debate, or if they're interested, and I appreciate it. We're going to record this. We'll send this out. We'll make this available for folks who weren't able to tune in live. And for everybody listening, I just say thanks, and make sure you get out, get yourself informed, and get out and vote. But other than that, check out TikTok. I was pretty impressed with what I saw, and I didn't think it was for me. So, but thank you, Nick.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Good night.